Well, it's January 2021. It's cold, it's dark, I'm all huddled up in my winter warming clothes, and it's exactly the time of year when you start thinking comfort food. So on the Bead Flowers website for this month, I'm entertaining everyone with some chocolate, sweets and candy, obviously all made out of beads, so completely calorie-free, healthy and perfect for anyone. And this video is part of that little series. Today I'm going to be inviting you to design and possibly make your own fantasy chocolates. So if ever you've opened a box of chocolates and thought, well, none of the flavours are exactly what you would choose if you had free reign, now's your chance to put that right. What is it that you would eat and create if you were going to make your own chocolate? So I'm going to make this as easy and accessible for you as I possibly can. In a second, I'll show you some samples to inspire you and show you what I'm talking about. Then I'm going to take you through the process of how you would design and make your chocolates. I've got some free downloads on the Bead Flowers website to help you with all of that as well. And then I will give you a quick technique reminder. I'm going to suggest you work in Peyote stitch. You'll be using circular and tubular variations and shaping these in different ways. So if the techniques are new to you, these reminders should help jog your memory. And I mean, if you've really never done this before, I'll also link underneath to some actual tutorials that will help you through step by step with written instructions, diagrams and all the rest of it. But this is really just a little bit of fun for you to do as much or as little as you want. So maybe you do no more than create a design on paper and fantasize about eating it. Or maybe you go the whole hog and turn your designs into reality. Either way, let's get started. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning the beaded chocolates and creating your own designs. So as you can see, there's really a ton of different ways that you can add beads of different colours to create the effects of different flavours of chocolate. Just basically imagine your favourite chocolate box and think of the flavours that you love best, and that should be enough to inspire your designs. So you can use the chocolates just as ornamentation. There's a few different things you can do with them. These samples are taken from my actual beaded chocolate box, so they're actually hollow underneath. I've also got this sample bracelet where I've made flat, chocolates with a bottom, so I would say solid, but they're actually hollow inside to allow me to string them onto a bracelet. And we've got a few different designs here. But basically, whatever you're deciding to do, the principle is exactly the same. So you're going to start by using some graph paper to just chart your design. And I mean, you can see something like these spots are really simple because all you need is a background chocolate colour and then just dot coloured beads to create the effect of kind of sprinkles on top of the chocolate. Another really simple design is this circles. So all you're doing is using your chocolate colour beads for the first few rows, then using your colour beads for the next couple of rows, another few rows in chocolate beads, another couple of rows in coloured beads, and take out the rest with chocolate beads. So, I mean, for designs like that, you probably don't even need to create a chart. If you want to get more complex and you're good at following charts, then you can do different variations on stripes. So, I mean, this one, we've got some nice diagonal stripes going along. They sort of are part diagonal but part spiralling round. And on the rounded shape, you can see that we've actually got real spirals of dark chocolate on a milk chocolate base. So that's, a few ideas to think about. The basic principle you're going to be using is to start by making a flat peyote shape, so either a square or a circle, which in reality is actually the hexagon increase technique. So later on I'll give you a reminder of both those increase techniques to create those shapes. Once you've got your flat shape, you're then going to continue beading just in tubular peyote, and that's going to pull everything downwards to give you the sides of your chocolate. And then you want to make a second flat shape, either your circle or your square, and you're just going to zip that onto the base. So the edge, the final row in your second flat shape, should zip up to the final row in the tubular section on the top of your chocolate. All nice and simple. Now, there is a download on the Bead Flowers website that accompanies all of this, and that gives you the graph paper to use. And I've also given you a few extra hints in that, and there's links to much more detailed tutorials if you're quite new to all this and need some extra help. So this is the idea of what we're going to be doing. Now let me show you the different steps to guide you on through the process. Well, that's given you an outline of what it is that we're going to be doing today. Now let me share those technique videos with you. These are just to remind you of how the peyote stitch techniques work for creating the shapes of chocolates. You can try both or just one of them. And as I said earlier, I've also got full written instructions available on the Bead Flowers website if you need a little more information than you're getting here. So I'll add the links to those in the description down below. But let's get back to the beading. Now, the peyote hexagon technique is basically a case of making increases in certain spaces to create the hexagon shaping. So in that respect, it's just circular peyote with a particular increase pattern in the same way that your triangles or squares or other circular peyote shapes are made. It's just the increase pattern varies from one shape to another. So after a slightly complicated explanation, let's see how that actually works. I've got row 1 completed here, so all I've done is pick up 3 beads, pass through them all again so they form a circle, as you can see here, and then I've secured that by knotting my working and tail threads. So in row 2, I'm going to pick up 2 beads and pass through the next bead in my circle. So if you're already used to working in triangular variation, this row is going to feel very familiar. But don't be fooled, everything changes on the next row. So again, I've got 2 beads going on the needle. I'm going through the next bead from my circle. And in my final stitch, I've got 2 beads going on the needle, going through the last bead from my circle, and I'm also then going to step up by passing through the first bead that I added in this row. So this is where things get a little different. Instead of more increases, in this third row I'm just going to add 1 bead in between each of my beads from row 2. So I'm coming out of between a pair of beads, I'm picking up 1 bead, I'm going through the second bead in the pair. Pull that in tight. Again, I'm putting 1 bead on the needle, going through the next bead from the previous row. That happens to be the first of a pair of beads. Again, 1 bead going on through the next bead from the previous row. 1 bead going on through the next bead from the previous row. 1 bead going on through the next bead from the previous row, and we're coming to our final stitch. So again, just 1 bead, it goes through the last bead from the previous row and it steps up through the first bead that I added in this row. So at the moment we've got an almost triangular shape, slightly more rounded than your normal triangle. If we move on to the next row, what we're going to see is the first in an increase cycle. So I'm actually going to pause here and let you just get those first 3 rows in place. They're your kind of base rows. And then in the next little section I'll talk about how the hexagon increase cycle works and what it is. Okay, now the hexagon increase cycle basically takes place across 3 rows. So in the first row you're going to make increases in each corner. In the next 2 rows you'll be adding just 1 bead per stitch, so no increases happening, and you may see these referred to as straight rows as opposed to increase rows. So let's get going. We've got our first 3 rows here. In this row we've got 6 stitches in total, so that will be our 6 corners. So we're going to pick up 2 beads, that's make an increase, pass through the next bead from the previous row. So we're adding on 2, passing through the next bead from the previous row. Again, pick up 2, pass through the next bead from the previous row, pick up 2, pass through the next bead from the previous row, add 2 beads, pass through the next bead from the previous row. Just make sure your beads get pulled in tight, because as with all peyote stitch, tension is critical here. We've got our last 2 beads going on, going through the final bead from the previous row, and then we're going to step up through just the first bead from the row we've just added. So that was our increase row. We've got 6 pairs of beads, that's 6 increases, and these are going to end up forming the corners of the hexagon. So now we've got 2 straight rows to stitch. So that means 1 bead going on the needle, you're going through the next bead from the previous row. That also happens to be the second bead in your pair. 1 bead going on, through the next bead in the previous row, which is the first bead in the next pair. One bead going on through the next bead from the previous row, which happens to be the second bead in a pair. And as we add on the next bead, we're going through the first bead of the next pair, through the second bead of that pair. So each time it's pick up one, pass through the next bead from the previous row. So in the places that are going to become corners, you're adding your one bead so it squeezes in between a pair. In the stitches that are going to end up becoming the sides of your shape, you're adding one bead. So if we just get to the end of this row, I'll pause and show you how the shaping is already starting to become apparent. Now the trick is again tension, and you need to make sure you really get your beads pulled in tight. If you keep everything loose, then you're going to end up with an awkward shape to start with, and it will be hard to make things better. So as that last bead goes in, I'm going through the final bead from my previous row and also stepping up through the bead that I added first in this row. So if I just show you, we're starting to get that hexagon shape already. Now as I add the next row, it's going to become even more pronounced. So this is another straight row. So you're literally just picking up one bead and passing through the next bead from your previous row. And because there were no increases in your previous row, this is all quite straightforward. You'll see in the pattern I've also given you the bead counts, so that's the number of beads per row. And if you're just starting to learn this technique, it can be very handy to count out the number of beads you need before you begin each row. That way you can just work your way through the little pile of beads, and when you reach the end of the row you'll immediately know if something went wrong. If you've got beads left over or not enough beads, then that's an indication that maybe you need to check back and see if everything is as it should be earlier on in the row. We're just coming to the end here now, so I've got my final bead going in. Again, I'm going through the last bead from the previous row and I'm stepping up. So we've got a sort of rounded hexagon, I guess you could say. The more increased cycles you add, the more pronounced the shaping becomes. So those 3 rows you've just watched me do, with your increase in the first row and your 2 straight rows, have formed your first hexagon increase cycle. So I'll just pause and let you digest all of that, and then I'll just show you one more row so you can really understand how this hexagon peyote stitch technique works. Okay, we're now ready to begin on a new cycle of the hexagon. So if we take a look at where we are at the moment, you can see where I've got increases from the first row of my previous cycle. And if I trace those out, I've got a wider gap than I've got in the spaces in the sides. You want to keep an eye on that, because as we're making increases to form our 6 corners each time, we need to place those increases in line with our previous set. So at this stage in the pattern, your shape is still quite circular and it can be tricky to see. But you're basically going to add 1 bead in any stitch that sits along a side, 2 beads that sit in the corner. So at this point we've only got 1 space, 1 bead to go along each side, and we've got our 6 corners. What you will find, as with any of the other peyote shapes, is that as you add in more increased cycles, your corners will not change, but the number of beads you have along each side will get larger, and that's as your shape gets larger. So in some cases you may see that the pattern tells you exactly which stitch you're supposed to be making your increase in. In other cases, you will find patterns that tell you to add a pair of beads, that is, make an increase in each corner, and add single beads along each side. And in that case, it will be down to you to work out where your corners are. So that's why I'm explaining how this alignment works. Now I've got my final increase going in my last stitch, and as with all the other rows, we've also got a step up. So let's just take a look back along our cycles now. You can see we've got the increase pair from our previous cycle, and if we follow that out, the increase pair from this cycle is sitting directly over it. So now I would add in my 2 straight rows. So let's just start that first row. Again, you're adding single beads along the sides. As we add in our bead that sits between the corner pair, that's going to make the corner seem more pronounced. So the more increased cycles you complete, the more pronounced your hexagon shape is going to be. But that gives you all the technique that you need. Just follow along carefully from the instructions in the pattern and any diagrams, and don't forget your step up, and also remember it can help you to count out the number of beads per row. But beyond that, all you're doing here is working in circular peyote and just placing increases in particular spots to create your shape. So I'll let you go and have a go at all that. The peyote square increase cycle is actually made with circular peyote stitch. You're creating the square by picking up beads in a certain order with a specific increase pattern, and that takes place over a cycle of 5 rows. So I'm going to demonstrate that row by row, but to start off we have 2 rows that just set things up. So let's take a look at those to begin with. Right, for the first row you're just going to pick up 4 beads, and I've tied my working and tail threads together in a double knot, so that's just pulled my 4 beads into a circle. Now if I pass my needle through one of the beads, it just gets it away from the knot. So that's row 1 completed. In row 2 we're going to pick up 1 bead, pass through the next bead in the circle. Again, pick up 1 bead, pass through the next bead in the circle, pick up 1, pass through 1, and your final bead in this row, again pick up 1 bead. You're going to pass through the last bead in the circle, and then, because this is circular peyote, we have a step up. So that means passing on through the first bead in the row that you've just added. So we've now got very much a little square shape, and if I pause there I'll let you catch up, and then we'll look at how the actual square cycle works. Okay, in row 1 of the square increase cycle you're going to be adding 3 beads in each corner. Now at this stage we've basically only got 4 corners, so in each stitch we're picking up 3 beads and we're passing through the next bead from the previous row. You want to just make sure you keep a fairly good tension as you're working. So again, 3 beads on the needle, through the next bead from the previous row, 3 beads on the needle, through the 3rd bead, that's the next bead from the previous row, and in your last stitch you've got 3 beads on the needle. You're going to pass through the last bead from the previous row, and then you're going to step up by passing through just the first bead from the row you've just completed. So that's the first bead in your group of 3. So we've now got quite a strange looking little shape. But I'll pause there, let you do that row, and then show you row 2 of the square increase cycle. Now in row 2 of the square increase cycle we're adding a pair of beads in each corner and a single bead along each side. So we're starting in a corner in this particular row, we're picking up 2 beads, you're going to miss the middle bead in that group of 3, and go through the third bead in the group. Now my middle bead has moved nicely into position, which is very kind of it. In the next stitch we're working along a side, so you're adding just one bead. You're going through just the first bead in your next group of 3. So we're in another corner now. Again, we're picking up 2 beads, skip the middle bead, pass through the third bead in the group of 3, and as you pull your thread up, you want to snuggle it and ease that middle bead down so it sort of pops downwards. That's it. Sometimes it needs a little bit of extra help with a fingernail. Now again, along a side, we're just adding a single bead, pass through the first bead in the next group in the corner. Once again, 2 beads to go on the needle, skipping the middle bead in the group of 3 and passing through the third bead. Make sure that middle bead just pops down. We've got 1 single bead to go in the next space along the side, and in this last corner again 2 beads, and we're missing the middle bead in the group of 3, going through the third bead, and as we pull everything up tight you want to just pop that middle bead downwards. So again, this one is not going to want to go, that's it. And the final stitch in this row is along a side, so just 1 bead. Again, you're going into the last bead from your previous row. That completes the row we're working on. And then you're going to step up just through the first bead from the row, so that's the first bead in a pair in this case. That completes the second row of your square increase cycle, so let's pause there and you can catch up. Okay, so row 3 of the square increase cycle, once again we're putting a pair of beads in each corner and a single bead along each space in the side. So once more we're starting from a corner, so we're going to pick up 2 beads, pass through the second bead in that corner pair. Now we've got 2 spaces along the side this time, so we've got 1 bead to go in each. So let's pick up 1, pass through 1, pick up 1, pass through the next bead, and that happens to be the first in your next corner pair. So once again we've got 2 to add, passing through the second bead in the corner pair. We've got 1 bead in each space along the side, and we're at the next corner. So again, the increase, that's 2 beads through the second bead in the pair, 1 bead through the next bead from the previous row rather, 1 bead through the first bead in your next corner pair. Being in a corner, we're picking up 2 beads, going through the second bead in the pair. And now as we come to the last side, we've got 1 bead to add in each space. And once again, as you get to the last space, your single bead goes on the needle, you go through the last bead from your previous row, and then you step up through just the first bead from this row, the row you've just finished. And that completes the third row of your square cycle. So you catch me up and then we'll look at the next row. Okay, now in row 4 of the cycle we've got no more increases, so that means we're always just putting 1 bead on the needle. So again, we're starting in a corner, we've got 1 bead on the needle, going through the second bead in the pair of beads that's sat in the corner. 1 bead on through the next bead from the previous row, pick up 1 through the next bead from the previous row, pick up 1 through the bead from the previous row, and again back at a corner, but we've got no increases this time, so we're picking up 1, passing through the second bead in the corner pair. Straight along the next side, adding 1 bead in each stitch, and with any luck this is all looking very familiar as peyote stitch. As we reach the next corner, again we've just gone through the first bead in the corner pair, pick up 1, go through the second bead in the corner pair. Along the next side we've got 1 bead in each stitch, and notice how each row the number of beads
in your sides is increasing, and that's going to happen throughout as you grow your square with more rows. So again, we're at a corner, we're still adding just one bead to go through the second bead in the corner pair. One bead in each stitch along the side. Let's just unhook that thread. And once more, as we come to the end of the row, we've got one bead added, go through the last bead from your previous row, and then step up by passing through the first bead in the row you've just completed. So we've definitely got a square shape now, and that completes row 4 of the square increase cycle. Now in row 5 of the square increase cycle, once again there's no increases, so we're just adding one bead in each stitch. This time you're basically working along the 4 sides, so it's just pick up one, pass through one, all the way around the row. Now if the pattern gives you bead counts for the row, this is really helpful. You can count out the beads before you start, and then that will help you identify if there have been any problems. If you've got beads left over at the end, then it's possible that you missed out a stitch or forgot an increase, depending what row you're on. If you run out of beads before you reach the end, then possibly you added too many beads in one place. But there is a third possibility, never discount that. Sometimes you just actually miscounted the beads or picked up beads from a wrong pile. So always look and check things carefully if you think you might have made a mistake, because it's much easier to correct it now before you go on, rather than finding out a few rows ahead that your square shape is looking a bit odd and something's gone wrong further back. So that has nipped us very quickly round the row. And I'm coming to my final bead, which in this case is a corner. Again, don't forget the step up. So I've gone through the bead from the previous row and I'm stepping up through the first bead I've added in this row. And now we've got an even slightly larger square shape. I'm going to pause there and then I'm going to talk about how we carry on and increase the size of our square. Okay, so that's shown you the full 5-row cycle that you go through, and you're just going to keep repeating that cycle. So if we take a look at the end of that 5th row in the cycle, we're now back to a very wide space in the corner, and that set you up to house your 3 beads. Remember the increase is always 3 beads in the corner in the first row. And you'll just carry on cycling through. So you can review these videos again. Just bear in mind that as you do extra cycles, the number of beads along each side is going to increase. And the other thing that's going to happen is your step up is going to start moving around the square. So in that first cycle, it was more or less always in a corner. As you progress now, it's going to gradually move along a side. It will get back to a corner eventually, but just don't get confused. Don't think that because you can't find a step up in the corner you've gone wrong. The step up will move. But that gets you set up to do a peyote square. So time to get moving.
Well, that's got you set up with an outline of what you need to do, some ideas for designing patterns, techniques to follow. So it's over to you now to go and see what you can come up with. As I said earlier, there's a few more extra bits and pieces on the Bead Flowers website if you do need extra help with any of this. The links to all of those are in the description down below the video. And I'm also running my chocolate event on the Bead Flowers website throughout January 2021. So if you are still watching in this month, then do pop on over and join in the fun on there. If you're watching after January 2021, don't worry, you can still make some beaded chocolates and enjoy that side of things. And if you've enjoyed this, then please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will keep posting videos to help you learn more beading, entertain you, and we'll just see what evolves. So thank you again for watching. Happy beading and happy dreaming about chocolates.